So, Rick, I got to tell you, I don't know if there has been a more important time over the past 8 years for lawyers, for tort attorneys, for trial lawyers, plaintiffs' attorneys, whatever you want to call them, because at the very least, I have understood over the past decade or so, in part because I've been working with Pap on this program, that trial lawyers basically function as deputies, if you will, of the state. And in a time where we're going to see unparalleled assault on our regulatory state in this country, it's going to be trial lawyers that are going to, I mean, I don't know how much of the slack they can pick up, but to the extent that we have any protections for consumers, for workers, for broadly speaking, for citizens, it's going to come from the trial lawyers, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll go a step further. I think of trial lawyers, plaintiffs' lawyers, as first responders, really. Legislative activity, regulatory activity generally comes after the fact. A courageous lawyer gets a case or two cases or three verdicts come in, and all of a sudden the regulatory agencies wake up and realize, hey, there may be a problem here. But the trial lawyers are really the first line of defense. And so this is an issue with broad implications not only for the trial lawyers, but for the American public as a whole. If there is an assault on access to courts and the use of tort law, then everyone is at risk.
So, I mean, we have two broad categories here, right? One is the assault on the existing access to the courts as far as the American public is concerned. But two, it's going to be rollbacks. Like, for instance, right now, this week, okay, we're looking at a bill in Congress, and maybe the only bill that passes in the lame duck session, that would provide a lot of relief for people dealing with opioid addiction. However, it would come at the expense of loosening regulations for those same pharmaceutical companies, which created the drugs that created the heroin epidemic that we have in this country, right? I think everybody knows the story. Mm-hmm. OxyContin was out there. I think some people went to jail because of promises they made about it. Certainly trial lawyers were heavily involved in exposing the fact that OxyContin didn't do what it said it did. Right. It created people who were addicted to this medication because their doctors thought it did something different than it actually did, because they were told that way by pharmaceutical representatives. People became addicted. They turned to a cheaper form of it, which ended up being like black tar heroin, and we have this massive problem in our country. But if we see regulations roll back on pharmaceutical companies, like, how does tort lawyers, how do plaintiff attorneys, how do they fill that vacuum?
Well, it's going to be an uphill fight. This is almost deja vu all over again. You may recall that some years ago when Newt Gingrich was in the House, he was sponsoring this so-called Contract for America, which I called Contract on America, that included various aspects of tort reform, which is better known as tort deform, which limits access to court, limits people's ability to sue, limits their rights, limits their ability to recover, limits the amounts they can recover. And all of that is coming back, I'm afraid. We've seen with the nomination of Congressman Price, Representative Tom Price from Georgia, to head Health and Human Services. He is a huge opponent, as you know, of the Affordable Health Care Act and wants to repeal it. But he has sponsored legislation in Georgia that would basically cut off access to courts for medical malpractice cases. These sorts of attacks keep going on and on and on. And I think it's up not only to the lawyers to be vigilant and to fight these sort of encroachments, but to get the word out to the American people that this will really affect them, their health, their well-being, their ability to get compensated if they're hurt. And they need to be alert, they need to be vigilant, and they need to be politically engaged, or this will happen before anyone is really aware of it.
I'm glad you mentioned Tom Price, because I think that we're going to see not only a repeal of the Affordable Care Act, but I think we're going to see essentially the destruction of Medicare. They're going to call it privatization, but that's That's what it is. It is the destruction of Medicare. Medicare is specifically not about private companies, but it's about a government administered health insurance program that obviously has a lot of its value insofar as it's a single payer system, or I should say, for people over the age of 65. I mean, that's what it is. And then in addition, of course, Medicaid is sort of, works hand in hand with that, low-income people and with even the more elderly as they head into nursing care. But let's just talk about this notion of medical malpractice tort reform, or as we're going to hear about it, because a lot of the lies that we hear about as to why healthcare in this country is so expensive, perpetrated by guys like Tom Price, right? He was a surgeon, and there's been a lot of research that shows that there are doctors out there who, when they have procedures that are expensive, when they have equipment that is expensive to run, they tend, maybe, this is human nature, you're a hammer, everything's a nail. They tend to prescribe that more often. That drives the cost of healthcare up, even though we know it's not leading to more effective outcomes. So what they do is they say, well, our insurance rates are killing us because of all the runaway medical malpractice. Can you please straighten out people on that, fix the record on that, please?
Yeah, there have been these rumors for years that medical malpractice insurance rates were skyrocketing because of crazy, outlandish runaway verdicts. And that's just simply not the case. We have data that tracks the number of verdicts, and that's all public record. That can be followed and discovered and learned. What isn't so easy to discover and learn is the insurance companies' reluctance to open their books and justify these rate increases. And so what happens is tort law really is quality control. By use of open courts and holding bad people accountable, it improves the profession as a whole. Bad doctors get sued, they get weeded out, they have problems with their licensure. It's a way to make sure that everybody gets better care. By closing the doors of the courthouse, by shielding doctors, by setting up these private tribunals, which are always stacked in favor of doctors, we're not serving anybody well. The rates of malpractice insurance won't necessarily come down, but people's ability to be compensated for horrible surgical errors will be dramatically limited. Caps on damages is the phenomenon where a jury may say that fair justice is $10 million, but a group of legislators in some state capital somewhere have said no matter what the jury thinks is fair, we're going to limit it to $250,000. And so it's really a distortion of a system of trial by jury that's lasted for centuries for reasons that can't be defended.
All right, well, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, I want to talk about a couple of the implications, more broadly speaking, about a Trump administration. I want to talk about the proposal for the FDA's anti-generic drug preemption, I should say, proposal. I want to talk about Supreme Court candidates. It appears that the Republicans successfully stole a seat, essentially, from Barack Obama, and that fifth seat will be nominated and filled by Donald Trump. What the implications of that are. We want to talk about things like a series of really just the implications of Donald Trump in terms of Americans' ability to access the courts. And I also want to ask you what this means for attorney generals around the country, because I'm not sure that people are aware of the relationship between trial attorneys and attorney generals, and how much some of these attorney generals around the country are going to be leaning on trial attorneys and plaintiffs' attorneys to be basically functioning as deputies. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Ring of Fire Radio.